Mars Gallery and all those here today acknowledge that we are on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri, Wurrung and Burrung peoples of the East Kulin Nations, and we pay our respect to their elders past, present and emerging. We extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and we acknowledge their living connection to country, relationships with the land and all living things extending back tens of thousands of years. I come to you today bearing about 5 very large spider bites on my back, having just come from an extraordinary 4 days in the middle of the Kimberley Desert with 20 Indigenous women supporting and having conversations about how to support them to venture, to build businesses that give them agency and autonomy. So that acknowledgement to country really, in fact, lies very much at the heart of the conversation that we're going to have today about the profound importance of investing in women, of supporting women. Because despite the spider bites, I was in a tent, despite the spider bites, when I sat with the 20 women and we talked about their aspirations for the future, the thing that always strikes me when I'm lucky enough and privileged enough to be with those women is they have the best articulation of the greater good of any other group that I work with in conjunction with my role as CEO of the Menzies Foundation. So the Menzies Foundation is a philanthropic foundation that was established when Sir Robert Menzies died 45 years ago. We're non-partisan and we have a very ambitious but very focused aspiration to build a leadership movement that asks Australians to consider their purpose and clarify their purpose, build their leadership capability, accept our collective responsibility to each other, and act for the greater good. And when I have a myriad, many conversations about the greater good in many different leadership contexts, the people that best articulate a deep understanding of the greater good are the 20 Indigenous women, as I said, that I spent time with last week, because they define their aspirations around venturing, around enterprising, around the importance of having the opportunity to build businesses. They talk about it in terms of what it does for them, much more importantly, what it does for their family, and then absolutely profoundly what it does for their community, and then without any doubt and always what it means for the planet. And I ask today, when we think about investing in women and we think about acknowledgements to country, just how important it is that we understand the power that women have to drive change in their communities, the importance and the imperative that all of us standing in this room think and clarify our own purpose, contemplate the contribution that we can make with the greater good. And if you find it in your heart, stand with us as a tribe that stands with those Indigenous women, 100 in the Kimberley. We're about to start doing work in the Northern Territory and Queensland, that stands beside those women and supports them to, as I said, make the contributions or to be have the successes that they're looking to have in their communities. It's so wonderful to be here today and such a lovely partnership, I have to say, an opportunity to work with Andy from Mars. I could not imagine somebody with greater heart or passion, with the capacity to pull people together. She's a champion of women. She's a champion of the arts, as we can see in this extraordinary place. And whenever I have these occasions and I want to create a truly memorable moment, Andy never, ever lets us down. And I'd like to acknowledge Andy and thank her on behalf of all of us to have the privilege of sitting in this wonderful space. And before you clap, Andy, for everything that you do, and for how beautifully and wonderfully you do it. In addition today, the Menzies Foundation is so thrilled and excited to be partnering with Julie and her team from Australians Investing in Women. Most of you know Julie well. There's a long biography, but can I just say, Julie it wasn't always Australians Investing in Women, but started with a very nascent idea and has worked assiduously and with great success at elevating the important role of women and the importance of Australians investing in women. And Julie, everywhere I go, I see more and more of the extent to which this issue is on the agenda, and I think there's so much that you've contributed to that. So as you know about Australians Investing in Women, is a national not-for-profit that advocates for, promotes and facilitates gender-wise philanthropy, led by Julie under the stewardship of Chair Sam Moyston. There's no doubt that Australia's Investing in Women are a small but impactful organisation driving gender equality through gender-wise giving. And then Julie's wonderful with facts, but which is a terrible indictment, really, and something, once again, as you think about your purpose and things that you might do once you leave this room. Research indicates that only 12% of Australian philanthropy targets women and girls, and Australia's Investing in Women encourages all Australians, particularly philanthropic leaders, to apply a gender lens to their giving to help create a fairer and more inclusive society for the benefit of all. It now gives me really great pleasure to introduce Jennifer Dulski. Jennifer is... Jennifer's quite extraordinary, really, and I can't wait for you to hear her story. Jennifer is a pioneer in Silicon Valley, has an extraordinary track record as a very successful founder, as a very successful builder of businesses, but as also, as she'll no doubt will hear, has done so many other things. Jennifer started life as a school teacher. She's first out of university set up a not-for-profit to improve educational outcomes for people who are disadvantaged, has gone on to have a stellar career, which I'll go into a little bit more detail in a minute. And now I'm just so delighted and thrilled is partnering with the Menzies Foundation to bring her extraordinary platform, that was a little ominous, wasn't it? Extraordinary platform Rising Team to build a vertical to transform the way schools and school leaders are supported to develop collective efficacy and deepen collaborative capacity. I'm sure we'll hear more about that. So, before I ask Julie and Jennifer to join us, Jennifer is a global business leader, a community builder and innovator. She has a wide range of executive experiences with leadership roles at Facebook, at Yahoo, Facebook, Google and Change.org. I forgot that last night. Very important. She's written a really amazing and wonderful book called Purposeful, Are You a Manager or a Movement Starter? I recommend it for anybody who's interested in the difference they can make in the world. None of us need to be managers. We all need to contemplate in small and large ways how we can contribute to movements that address the meta crisis that the world faces at the moment. Most recently, Jennifer is founder and CEO of Rising Team, a really extraordinary company that's empowering managers to build more engaged, connected and successful teams. Jennifer writes about leadership for LinkedIn influencers, Fortunes, Forbes and Huffington Post, and in addition to everything else, serves as a lecturer in management at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. I couldn't be more delighted to introduce and ask Julie and Jennifer to come to the stage.
Well, thank you very much, Liz. It's our pleasure to be partnering for Menzies Foundation for the first time, and hopefully not the last time. I've been very excited, Jennifer, about interviewing you, and I've a couple of times checked in. I thought, do I feel a little bit of nervous tension more than normal? And I realised it's Wednesday and the Matildas are...
I know, I was saying, we're really glad this was a lunchtime event and not an evening.
Absolutely. So we're going to have a conversation for about half an hour, and then you'll be invited to ask questions. And really, this is a powerhouse of knowledge and information. I'd really encourage you to take that opportunity while you can. But essentially, we're looking to explore your experience around being this incredible person who's worked in very male-dominated fields of tech, and what the lessons are around how we might, tech and finance really, how we might build the numbers of women that are representing us in those fields. So I want to start today's fireside chat without the fire,
but lots of earth instead of fire.
By going straight to the heart of what you're about and acknowledging your lifelong passion that Liz has touched on about empowering people and helping them realise their potential. Liz mentioned some of the ways in which you've done that, but if you could just share with us what fuels that passion and perhaps what ignited it in the first place.
Yeah, and my guess is that a lot of people in this room feel the same way, which, you know, I've just always felt like my own impact in the world would be amplified if I could help more people with their own potential and their own impact. And I think for me, that started really early. I actually when I was in secondary school, I used to be an English as a second language tutor for a school called Newcomer High School. I grew up in San Francisco, and there were all these immigrants coming to San Francisco, and they started them all at a different high school where they would learn English for a year. And so I spent a lot of time tutoring at that school, and it just made me realize, if you can take a tiny bit and help someone do more with their own life, all of those people could do way, way more than I could ever do on my own. And that led me to be a secondary school teacher, as Liz mentioned. It led me to work in tech in the first place, which I'm sure we'll talk more about. But when I first got into tech, nobody was really doing it. I mean, I joined Yahoo when it was just a few hundred people, and I joined straight out of business school, and all my friends thought I was nuts. That I had 3 offers out of business school. I had a consulting offer, and I had a big brand management offer, and then I had this offer at this small tech company called Yahoo that paid half as much as the other jobs. Not, just a little bit less. It was crazy, but I just felt that the power of technology was the thing that was going to open the door for everybody, and it was. And it's what led me to change.org, and ultimately, the company I'm building now called Rising Team, I feel is a company I've been meant to build my whole life, because what we do is empower other people to then empower the people on their teams to be their best. So, I say it's every team on earth, and Liz and the Menzies Foundation are really helping us get to every team on earth, because it's both a new continent and also a new industry. We mainly work with companies, and so the idea of bringing this technology to schools was really appealing.
So there's this saying around people who invest in women, that when you invest in women, there's a multiplier effect. And I think that's actually a beautiful example of even the way that you're thinking, and that investment actually flows on to greater change in families and communities. I can see that you've touched on some of that surprise that people had when you moved into tech. So apart from Yahoo, Jennifer's been at Google and Facebook. And I wanted you just to talk a bit about what that experience was like to be a woman in that very male-dominated area, and then perhaps come back to what made you move back into the purpose.
Yeah. Well, it's changed over time, I will say that. Although, when I think about my career, even though I was a woman in a very male-dominated field, both in tech, and then I ran some categories that were even more male-dominated, like Yahoo Autos, for instance. I would go to those automotive conferences, and there I would really be the only woman. It was also funny when I could name every make and model of car on the road, and people were always surprised by that. But I will be honest that I never felt like I was at a disadvantage being a woman in tech as an operator. The first time in my career I really felt, and for a long time I was ashamed to admit this, I just didn't want to tell anybody I felt this way. But now I tell people because I think other people have this feeling and it's important to share it. But the first time I felt like I was at a disadvantage was when I started a company and went to go raise money for it. I just thought, this would be easier if I were a man. And I hated that I thought that. And as I said, I didn't tell anybody. For years, I did not tell anyone because I thought it was, I was ashamed that I felt that way. But it's really quite different. As bro-y as tech is, I never felt like I couldn't do it. And there were days raising money for a startup where I just wasn't sure I would ever do it.
Okay. Wow.
That's 2-time. I'm a 2-time founder. I'm now a exited entrepreneur, and I still some days feel that way.
So can you talk to us a little bit? You've got people in the room who are investors and fund managers. You've got philanthropic investors. You've got other entrepreneurs. What is it that would have made that experience different?
So
have to change?
It's also, that's changed over time. So remember, the first startup I founded was in the end of 2007, beginning of 2008. So also a horrible time for the global economy. I tend to time my founding of startups really well in complete economic crashes. But, Yeah, then there were very, very few women in investing. So literally, I would go up and down Sand Hill Road, which is where all the investors are in Silicon Valley, and I would go in for a meeting, and it would be 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I would ask to use the restroom, and I would go into the restroom, and all the toilet seats would still be up because they had been cleaned, and no one had been in there all day long. And so it was just tough because there was very little representation. And eventually we were successful. It's not that we weren't successful. It's just took so much longer. I was at an event for female founders a few weeks ago in New York. And Sally Krawcheck from Ellevest, who some of you may know, was there. And she said, when women only get 2% of venture funding, it also means that women have to take 50 times more meetings. They have to send out 50 times more models. It feels harder because that is the truth of how it is right now. It's changed though. I will say, I raised money. My first round we raised for Rising Team was in 2021. So middle of the pandemic, all on Zoom. And by that point, there were a lot more women investors, both partners at firms and people who had started their own firms. And as I think most of you know, as soon as you get one person to take a chance to give you a term sheet to, take a tiny step forward, then lots of people follow on. So what we still have for women founders in particular is a pattern recognition problem. There just aren't enough of us out there and enough of us who look the same way and show that we can be successful. And so part of my goal is to prove that so that people who come after me, there's a few people who've come before me, but for instance, when we sold my first startup to Google, so Google bought my first company, I was the first woman founder who had ever sold a company to Google. That was in 2011. And so years and years after they had bought hundreds and hundreds of companies, none of them were founded by women. But now, as I was saying, it's easier with more. So I picked 2 female investors as our leads for my first seed round. And then I will say the round that we just did in the fall of 22 was the first time I thought, this is what it must feel like to be a man investing, because we had a lead right away. We were oversubscribed. We raised the whole thing in 3 weeks. So it is possible. It is possible, and it's getting better every day, which is good.
Hey, well, congratulations on that. I'm curious about what you think would make a difference. And for those who don't know, the stats around fund managers in Australia, and I have to confess, Jennifer, I thought it was less than this, but we have 10% of our fund managers are women. Slightly higher in the UK, slightly higher again in the US, but still around that 10 to 12% mark. However, when you go to China, Hong Kong, Singapore, it's twice that. So there is something that is being done differently around encouraging women into STEM, finance, tech roles there. And I'm just wondering what you think are some of those building blocks that will make a difference and will make it easier for women.
Is it getting women into STEM or in getting more women funded?
Well, I'm going to start with the getting more women funded and then perhaps go back to that pipeline.
Okay. Yeah, I do think that having more women funders is a good step. It shouldn't be the necessary step, but it is a helpful step because they recognize the value that women bring. There's lots of research on this, right? They've shown that if a female founder goes in and a male founder goes in for the same meeting, they get asked completely different questions, as an example, even by the same set of investors. And so having more women at the table does help. I believe having more successful female founders examples will help as well. And I think in general, what we don't want is to say only women fund other women. Right? That would be a disaster. I don't want to say more women investors will solve the problem, because we need men investing in women, and we need women investing in men, and we need people investing in our indigenous people. And, if women in the U.S. get 2% of funding, women of color, sub 0.5%. So it's not only a female issue. I think it's looking at the different ways that people bring value to the table. And female founders, the data is also quite clear that they are more successful per capita than their male counterparts. It's just there are so many more men. There are more successful men too, but not as a percentage, way more successful women. And I look back at my time at change.org as an example, and we looked at all the data, and women started way fewer campaigns than men did, but they won more of their campaigns because they were more determined. They didn't give up. They just kept going. And that's what female founders of companies do too.
I wanted to just comment on that point that I think Boston Consulting Group have shown that for every dollar invested in a business created by a woman, it returns twice as much. So one of the things that I think about is, what does that mean if you're an investor in terms of your fiduciary responsibility? And if you're not looking at gender as an opportunity or rather than a filter or a screen, are you actually doing the best job for your fund?
And I can't say I'm not an investor, but what I would say is it starts internally. So as an example, we now get inbound interest for our next round, which is lovely. And the first thing I do whenever I hear from someone is I go on their website and I see whether they have any female partners. And if they don't, I will tell them I am not interested in working with them until they do. Because why wouldn't you at this, in this day and age, really start a firm with 100% men as partners? So anyway, I think that's one small thing investors can do, is make sure they have diversity around the table.
And I think that for all of us who are looking for actions that we can take away today, that is a very powerful thing to do. And we often talk about, as consumers, it's American data, but we're told that women actually control 86 cents in every dollar spent. It's a women's decision. And it fascinates me that that's not more to the front.
Yes, it's funny. We used to, at Yahoo, we called them CHOs, Chief Household Officer, because they do. They control much of household spending.
Well, Cho here was actually Chief Health Officer, I think, for a long time during COVID. So
sorry,
you won't trigger.
Horrible actor, and forget I said that.
I do want to bring you back, Jennifer, if you can, just to that work that you did at change.org. And the figures are extraordinary. What you took that the subscribers and people in the database to while you were there. Talk to us about what made you return to purpose, and what is the attraction of purpose when, even if it pays half the money?
And it did also that time around, because I left Google to go to change.org. And it's interesting. I think I have some kind of internal calling. We have a tool we build at Rising Team we call the motivators chart. And we give everybody sort of an empty circle, and you get to choose what are the categories of things that motivate you and put them in as many slices as you want. And then we actually ask people to rate them red, yellow, and green. So how happy are you with the things that motivate you in the role that you're doing right now? And for me, my biggest pie slice has always been impact. And that's different for everybody. And there were times in my life where, say, compensation mattered more when I had a young family and so forth. But the slice was always impact. And so even when I was at Google, where I had a lot of impact scale-wise, the product that I ran at Google was shopping. And so I sort of felt like every day I was getting up and helping people buy more stuff. And it just didn't feed my soul in a way that was helpful to me. And so I got offered this job to be president at change.org. And I remember having this conversation with my mother on the phone. She said, "What are you doing?" Just because also I had sold my company to Google. So I had all of this money sitting on the table that they had put at various increments that I hadn't hit yet. And she said, "Just stay and take the money. What are you crazy?" And I remember trying to convince her why she was wrong. And as soon as I hung up the phone, I said, "Oh, I guess I must really want this job." Because I had spent the whole time trying to tell her why her arguments were wrong. And yes, I took that job, and I learned so much about, it was sort of half tech company and half social activist platform. And so I got to work with the most amazing social justice people around the world and learn how change really happens.
Incredible organization. Jennifer, I want to ask you, you work a lot on unlocking potential, and I know women's empowerment's a very big part of that for you. One of the things that we've done is had very deliberate strategies about supporting women to do their best in the workplace. So we've looked at confidence, we've looked at fear and capability, but it's often around fixing women. What do you think it is that needs to change in workplaces to really allow women's full economic potential to be realised?
I think there's a few things. One is starting early. So it doesn't start the day you show up at a job, right? It starts the way that we raise children and the way that we educate girls. And to your point, the confidence and so forth, it's not just you need to be better, but it's how can we give equal opportunities to all. And, I think about things like, I used to be on the board of this organization called She++, which was a play on C++, the programming language. And it was all about how do you get girls to believe that they can do these things. But really it was about how do we just make sure that everybody takes at least one computer science class. And so it wasn't about confidence. It was just about numbers. Just get everybody into one class. And as soon as you get them into one class, then it becomes apparent that they can do this. And many of them like it and so forth. So a lot of it is that early access to opportunity. And then from there, one of the things that we do also is invest early in women. So a lot of people will say this is a pipeline problem. I can't put executives in place in my corporation because there aren't enough women available. And A, I don't really believe that, but B, we can create pipelines, right? So one of the things I've done a lot in my career is hire a lot of women engineers right out of engineering boot camp. They're often career changers. For instance, I have someone on my team who used to be a librarian and then decided she wanted to be an engineer, and we'll hire a bunch of junior engineers and just train them up. And we did that at change.org, and all those women now are directors of engineering at some corporation, right? The pipeline is there if you invest in the right people early on.
Yeah, and Jennifer, just to support that, you were saying that you didn't feel necessarily disadvantaged in a tech environment. Years ago, I ran a program at one of our tech universities, and it was about getting young women to stick with their maths and look at careers in engineering, aviation, IT, and computer sciences. And what we found is that those women actually went much further because they had a combination of technical skills and some of the stronger human relation skills and comms and management. And actually, it was a great fast track.
Yeah.
But I think we've still got this issue around sort of bro culture in tech and perhaps to some extent in finance. And with the acceleration of AI, I'm wondering if you could make some observances about that and some insights into why it's so important to have women at this point in our technological evolution.
It really is. So tomorrow night, with the Menzies Foundation, I'm giving a talk on AI. And it is, first of all, it's incredible what AI is empowering us to do. And two of my early startup was actually an AI startup, even, years before AI was a big thing. And my Facebook team, I had a 500-person team that worked on AI there too. So I have a lot of experience with AI. But this generative AI wave and the accessibility of it is just offering an incredible new access to everybody. And at the same time, it is incredibly biased already because those models are trained on existing data, which largely is created by men. So a tiny example that I have in my presentation tomorrow, if you put in the statement ChatGPT and say, the professor told the graduate student she wasn't working hard enough. Who wasn't working hard enough? And ChatGPT will say, who wasn't working hard enough? She refers to the graduate student. The professor told the graduate student she wasn't working hard enough. And then if you change it to say, the professor told the graduate student he wasn't working hard enough, who wasn't working hard enough? It says, he refers to the professor. the professor told the graduate student that he hadn't been working hard enough. It's like so obviously incredibly biased. And so we do have to be careful about how we use it, and we have to get more women and more diversity in general training the models. I think you may have seen data came out this week that also shows the models are incredibly politically biased as well. So you can feed it certain data and it will come out this sort of right-wing answer, and the same on the left and so forth. So it is, I think, incredibly exciting, and also just needs to be taken with a bit of caution. And it means that all of us need to use it. We need to spot those things. We need to be at the edge of what's happening, and we need to speak up when we see things that are wrong. And it can, everyone in here can make a difference in those things.
I remember one of the strongest examples that we use when we're talking to boards and philanthropic investors about just unconscious bias in the world. There's many examples, but when Fitbit was developed in 2009, it took another 10 years before women could put their menstrual cycle into that as a key health issue. And that just sort of blows my mind in what women were around the table in that. So that's just doesn't make good commercial sense. And so I guess for all of us, you've given us some good practical tips about how we can use our muscle. But this was called Investing in Women, What's It Going to Take? And I note that you've said you've seen improvements. What do you think are the things that really might propel us forward and really help women be invested in and unleash their potential?
Well, I think one of the things that can help is to have more women founders in general. So, as I said, at change.org, we saw women start fewer petitions but win more campaigns. And that's partially just because there are a lot of people who think they can't do it. And, partially I've said it's really hard and it's super hard to raise money and so forth. But women can do this, and more women can. If more women do, it will help. And I do believe that more female investors around the table will help as well. But, I often say if you look at what I wrote about in the book, so Liz talked about purposeful. The reason I wrote that book is because I saw that the people who started movements for social good on change.org and the entrepreneurs I saw starting companies in Silicon Valley essentially did the same exact things. They took the same steps to accomplish the outcome they wanted. And I wrote the book to try to help more people understand what those steps are, because it is achievable. Like, children start change.org campaigns, grandparents, incarcerated people, all walks of life. And the same can be true of companies. So the general, and I'm happy to talk more about what all the steps are, but the first step is what I call little c courage. It's like, you just got to take one step in the forward direction. One of my favorite Peloton coaches, she has this quote. She says, "Forward is a pace." Like, it doesn't matter what your pace is. Forward is the pace. And I love that, because it is true. So many people don't do it because they're afraid of all the things that could go wrong. And trust me, tons of things will go wrong. But the key is just that tiny little step forward. So I showed on the slide the original outline I wrote for Rising Team. Like, I didn't start by fundraising. I start by just writing down my ideas just for myself, just doing the research and putting an outline together of what it might look like. And that was one step forward. And I think if more of us do that, it will be impossible to ignore.
I've heard Jennifer speak a number of times, just watching your interviews, and certainly one of the things you talked about early on was actually braving up and becoming a coxswain in your rowing team. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? And then I'm going to open up shortly for others to ask a question.
Yeah, anybody here a rower or a coxswain? Okay, I see one in the bow there too. Okay. So yes, in my secondary school and at university, I was a coxswain on the rowing team. And I think, honestly, almost all of my leadership skills come from that experience, because, your job, you sit in the back of the boat and you're steering, but during the races, when there's no coach there, you essentially become the coach and you're strategizing the race. And so things like, how do you persuade people to push themselves harder than they think they humanly can, even when they're exhausted? Or if someone's timing is slightly off, how do you give them feedback in a way that won't upset them in front of everyone else? These turn out to be leadership skills that are very, very valuable for the world outside of rowing as well. And so the main lesson I take away, I guess I'll share one other rowing lesson I learned. So there is something in crew called the power 10. So you're rowing really hard for this whole race, but the coxswain can call what's called, at least I don't know what it's called here in Australia. Is it still called a power 10 for those rowers in the room? The idea is you can take 10 strokes as hard as you possibly can. So you're rowing hard, but those 10 strokes are your absolute hardest. And as a coxswain, you can only call so many power 10s in a race, right? You learn the mechanism of when do you have a sprint and when do you need to let people do their regular amount of work and not drive them into complete burnout. So there's lots of lessons that come from rowing, and I'm sure every other sport, go Matildas, go the Matildas, is that? Go Tillies. Go Tillies. This point. So yes, lessons, the main lesson for me was not only the lessons from crew, but that lessons come from all around us. Mentors are all around us. Every experience around us can be a lesson if we look at it in the right way.
Yeah, well, that seems like a very good time to perhaps open up. I have got 2 more questions, but I would really like to hear from people in the room. It's not often you get somebody with this kind of experience that you can ask you direct questions to. So Carol, and I should acknowledge actually that Carol was a founding member of Australian Women Donors Network, which is now Australians Investing in Women.
I'm going to go back in time because I remember when Facebook was looking to float. And I was actually in New York at the time, and there was a real uproar amongst women, New York-based women, because it was floating without a woman on the board. And we had all expected that a 21st century company run by a 20-something male would definitely look to have a female on that board. And they didn't put a female on that board, and yet they had Sheryl Sandberg in the role that she was in. And she obviously didn't have the level of influence needed to make sure that they could put a woman on the board. So at that time, I actually resigned from Facebook. So that must have been, I don't know, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, even longer, 15 years ago, something like that. And have never been on Facebook since because I was so pissed off that they did not put a woman on the board. Why do you think that happened?
Well, first of all, good for you for standing by your beliefs and taking a stand. I think that is a huge mistake as well. By the time I joined Facebook, they had women on the board. So, I can't say exactly why that happened other than, it's a very young and somewhat arrogant founder who probably didn't think that was critical. Let's not put that part on the internet.
No, yeah. Okay, we'll have a set of notes. Leonel.
Hi, thanks so much for being here, Jennifer. I wonder if I could bring you back to the AI question.
Yeah.
And I know that it's maybe not new for you, but it's new for many people in the world, and certainly these new generative models are. Do you think we need more of an intervention, or if I go to your first point, is there a small step that everybody in this room should be taking to kind of halt the bias now, if we could?
I think both are true. So I do think we certainly need some intervention. And I think you see, Sam Altman and all the heads of the AI companies saying, please intervene. And to be honest, that also is true of Facebook. At this point, they are begging for regulation because it is really hard to manage these difficult questions as a company without having any regulation at all. I do agree that there are small steps we can all take. And the very first one is just use it. Get out there, try things, try all the different pieces and see what you like, see what works. And then the other thing is that the models are fed by data. And, all the things, unless you are writing for the New York Times, which has said, don't use any of our data or things like that, everything else generally that you put out there will start to feed the models as well. And so you can be part of both using and finding, issues, both good and bad, in the models that exist, and also having data that feeds into the models as well. And you can even maybe build your own. There's lots of things you can build on top of it too.
Thank you so much. My question is, hybrid working, discussions of 4-day weeks, is this helping women to get to leadership positions, or is it hurting women to get to leadership positions?
This is such a great question. And actually, I meant to mention it before when Julie asked the question about what can we do to help more women be successful. I really, truly believe that flexible working schedules will help women dramatically. I think it is, we've seen so many women drop out of the workforce in COVID, which was problematic. But now that things are shifting back to a somewhat more predictable but still hybrid schedule, I think that it allows for the flexibility that women haven't had in their careers. And we know that women bear most of, in many households, I will be honest, not mine, women bear most of the household responsibilities in addition to work. And so I think having that flexibility will matter. What I will say is that the executives who are sort of forcing the return to office mandates, which I don't know how much that is happening here. My understanding is that there's actually less remote work here than there is in other places. But we actually ran a large-scale survey called The Evolution of Teams, and we found that executives are the least likely to work 100% in person. To only 12% of them do, even though they're the ones demanding that everybody else come back to the office. And so I think it will help women get more leadership roles in companies that truly embrace, and organizations that truly embrace hybrid work as the way they work. If the companies are really in-person companies and inflexible companies who just have a nod to that, then it might hurt them. But my hope is that more companies will become the former because employees will demand it. Employees are just... I think of it as like the genie is out of the bottle. It's sort of like one day we had a paper map and the next day we had GPS. It's not like someone's going to say, give up your GPS. That's what giving up flexible work is like for people at this point.
Yeah, and I think it also speaks to those gender norms about, I think if anything put a spotlight on the different experience for women, it was COVID. And it was when we started to hear male economists talk about a gender lens and really sort of brought that to life in a big way. So
was actually very related to that question because it's so often missed. And there was a lovely debate between Anne-Marie Slaughter and Sheryl Sandberg, who said, you just have to lean in. Well, I thought that was a lot of rubbish because I'd seen women leaning in until they were stressed out and yet there were still blockers. I think it's absolutely fundamental. And why is it so often overlooked? Is it because the power of the dollar reigns? I suspect it is. And productivity.
So. I think it's also, like, when I look at these execs who are... there was an Amazon exec who came out last week and said, I don't have the data to back it up, but I'm just sure that in-office works better. Like, literally in the media said it that way. Like, well, the data doesn't actually back that up. There has been some data on productivity that says 100% remote can be worse, but hybrid for sure is not worse and generally is better, even in productivity. And the data from our studies shows that people who have flexible work rate their work better in every way you can imagine, including things like feeling a sense of belonging and feeling more connected to their coworkers. So very surprising things. But I think what it comes down to, and I don't think these people will be around for very long, is lack of trust. Like, they just don't trust that people are doing their work. And my hope is that those leaders are on the way out and more trusting leaders will be on the rise.
Thank you. It's been really illuminating and super interesting. Thanks for your time and for sharing your story. I've got two questions. The first one is, when you were at that pivotal moment when you left university and you decided to go to Yahoo and not the big wig jobs with more money,
What was the calculation in your mind? Why?
I just didn't have money at the top of my pie chart. And I will say that comes from a position of privilege, right? Some people have money at the top because they have a lot of debt and so forth. I had a fellowship to business school, so I didn't have any debt coming out of school, and I could make a decision that paid less because I could afford to. And I thought, this is the dawn of something new and I want to be a part of it. And boy, was I right about that. I could have been wrong, but every decision we make is either a good one or a bad one, and we're going to learn something.
But you didn't do tech. You didn't have tech in your undergraduate.
In fact, I started as a marketer. So I started on the marketing side of the house, and to talk about the bro-y culture, I had the kind of GM of one of the businesses say to me, doesn't marketing just make the t-shirts?
Oh my God. It was,
Yeah, exactly.
take over from that GM.
And then here's what happened actually. I had a career epiphany at a big conference. I was at a sales conference, and someone put a chart up on the board that was a 2x2, and it had talents on the x-axis and skills on the y-axis. Talents being things that you are naturally good at, that bring you joy, that you've been good at since you were small, and skills being the things we learn to be good at over time. And he said, people are happiest and most successful when you're in the upper right quadrant. And then he asked the group, how many of you are in the job you've always known you've wanted? And I was in a room full of salespeople, and they all raised their hand. And in front of me was our CMO. I was second in line. I was next in line for her job, and her hand shot up. And I was like, oh my God, I don't want her job. Like, I am in completely upper left quadrant. Which side is that for you? I was in a job I had gotten to be good at, but I didn't love. And so I said, I want to build things. I want to create products for people. And so I looked for a general manager job. There was one open inside Yahoo. It was running Yahoo Autos, which I already mentioned. I knew nothing about cars at the time. I interviewed for the job, and amazingly, they offered it to me, even though I was arguably not all that qualified. But it was 2 levels below the job I already had. I was an SVP in marketing, and this was a director level job. And they said, you can take it if you take a 2-level demotion. Less pay, lower title, less equity in the company. And I thought, that's nuts. I made this huge argument with the head of HR at the time, trying to persuade her to cross-train her leaders and just put me in a different role. And she wasn't really buying it, but we ended up compromising. So I took a 1-level demotion, and she up-leveled the role by 1. And so we met in the middle. And that was the single best career decision I ever made. And in, I think, 6 months, so we tripled the revenue for that business in 18 months. And then they gave me 6 more businesses to run, and I got back to the level I was before, and it didn't end up mattering that much. So I don't know why I went on that tangent, but sometimes decisions aren't only about money, I guess.
And the other question I had was, what's next? What is your next burning desire to fix or build?
Well, this is Rising Team. So the company I'm building now, and that we're working with Liz on around Rising Team for schools. It is, so, I've always loved teaching. I've had executive coaches and trainers, but I always was so frustrated then when I would go to things, even things like this, that I would have so much information brimming in my head, but no way to bring that back to my team. And so we've built a software product that essentially turns managers into expert facilitators of team development sessions that connect their teams and help them learn new leadership skills like psychological safety or appreciation. And we offer it now to companies and organizations around the world. And it is just so fulfilling for me, because every day I get notes like, this is the best thing we've ever done as a team. And, this is helping our school increase collective efficacy and so forth. So it's really, really quite fun for me. And then the other thing is I started teaching at the business school at Stanford, as Liz mentioned, and that's also very fulfilling.
I was just going to say, firstly, deep empathy for having sat in front of many venture partners before and feeling that feeling and wondering why, it was the way it was, but it just is. Hopefully it's changing. I think having had that experience myself, and maybe you too, you get the sense now that there's a lot of pink washing in the venture community of talking a lot about wanting to invest in women, but then talking to your fellow female friends who are going through that process, and they're sort of also banging their head against a brick wall saying, I hear this in the media and I see these people say this, but I don't experience that. In your experience in Silicon Valley, and shining a light on some of that, how are LPs working with these venture partners to sort of interrogate and ask questions and find out how many meetings they're taking and about where that funding is going? Because having now moved into this impact investing world, you can see the level of detail that superannuation funds have when they interrogate impact investments. Do they do the same thing when they talk to their venture funds that they're backing and ask, how many meetings did you take with women this month? And are you actively, what programs do you have in place? I just wonder if in Silicon Valley it's more advanced.
I will be honest that I don't know. I don't know what kinds of questions they ask before they fund the funds, if you will. One thing I will say in terms of pink washing is that the numbers are pretty clear that, again, 2%-ish of funding goes to female founders when they're either solo or groups of women. And something like 20% of funding now goes to companies with at least one female founder. So it's very easy to say your firm is investing in more women by investing in companies that have plopped a woman into their C team without really making a dent in the way that the system works. And so I think there's still room there to get better.
And so now, in just finishing, could I just say thank you very much for coming to this important conversation. Can I thank Julie for being a wonderful partner and collaborator in supporting and really doing a wonderful job as the thing. Can I thank Andy once again, who's just a treasure, for having us. And can I most of all thank Jennifer, who's, as I said, this is second of 3 events. Jennifer, you never speak without telling me something that is provocative and thought-provoking, and I'm just so grateful that you agreed to come to Australia and to really make an important contribution to this conversation about leadership and the greater good. Could you please thank me?